The universe does not care about your architecture. To a hydrogen atom, there is no meaningful difference between the gold in a wedding ring and the lead in a bullet, nor does the vacuum of space distinguish between the neural firing of a genius and the heat radiating from a dying star. We spent 4 billion years climbing out of the primordial soup, convinced that our complexity granted us some special status in the ledger of reality. We assumed that because we could name the stars, we were somehow more than the dust they were made of. But the laws of thermodynamics do not read poetry, and they certainly do not respect the sanctity of biological life. Everything you see, from the screen in your hand to the oxygen in your lungs, is just a temporary configuration of matter. We are merely a brief, noisy interruption in the long, silent history of the periodic table. The ultimate dream of our species was never fire or the wheel, but the ability to tell the smallest parts of the world exactly where to sit. We wanted a tool that did not just move objects, but redefine them at the foundational level. If you can control the position of every single atom, the distinction between trash and treasure evaporates instantly. You could turn a handful of common dirt into a steak, a diamond, or a liter of clean water simply by nudging the electrons into the right orbits. This is the promise of the molecular assembler, the final invention that makes all other inventions obsolete. It is the perfect servant, a machine that builds itself out of the very air we breathe. However, there is a dark irony in creating a tool that can manufacture anything, because such a tool must, by definition, be able to manufacture itself. We have spent centuries trying to master the atom so we could build a paradise, never realizing that the ultimate tool is also the ultimate predator. A single speck of dust, no larger than a bacterium, could hold the blueprint for the end of everything we have ever known. It does not hate us, and it does not want to rule us. It simply views us as a convenient source of raw material. In the eyes of a self-replicating machine, the entire biosphere is just a massive, unorganized warehouse of spare parts. We're not being conquered by an alien empire. We're being recycled by our own screwdrivers. The concept of the molecular assembler began as a whisper in the halls of physics, a theoretical possibility that Richard Feynman famously noted had plenty of room at the bottom. We envisioned a future where scarcity was a ghost of the past, a relic of a primitive age where we had to dig holes in the ground to find what we needed. With a fleet of nanoscopic builders, we could construct a skyscraper in an afternoon or scrub the carbon from the atmosphere with the flick of a switch. These machines would be the surgeons of the future, swimming through our veins to repair DNA damage before it ever became cancer. We saw them as the God machine, the final bridge between the messy reality of biology and the clean precision of mathematics. It was the ultimate expression of human ego to believe we could command the building blocks of the universe without consequence. To understand the power of this technology, you have to stop thinking about machines as things made of gears and wires and start thinking of them as software written in the language of atoms. A molecular assembler is essentially a programmable ribosome, a tiny factory that takes in feedstocks and outputs a specific molecular structure. If you give it the right instructions, it can rearrange the carbon in a piece of charcoal into the lattice structure of a diamond in seconds. This is not magic. It is just chemistry with a sense of direction and a very fast clock speed. The problem is that the most efficient thing such a machine can build is another version of itself. Once you solve the problem of self-replication, you have created a force that no longer needs a human hand to guide it. We often forget that the God machine does not need to be intelligent to be effective. It only needs to be persistent. A virus is not smart, yet it can bring a global civilization to its knees by simply following a set of chemical instructions to copy itself. When we talk about nanobots, we are not talking about tiny robots with arms and legs, but about synthetic organisms that operate at the speed of light compared to our sluggish biology. They would be the ultimate invasive species, capable of outcompeting every living thing on Earth for the same basic resources. A handful of dirt contains enough atoms to build 1 billion such machines, and each of those machines can build a billion more. We are playing with the fundamental hardware of reality, and we have no way to pull the plug. The math of exponential growth is something the human brain is fundamentally ill-equipped to understand. We think in linear terms, imagining that if a problem starts small, it will grow slowly enough for us to react and find a solution. But a self-replicating machine does not work on a linear scale. It works on a doubling schedule that quickly outstrips any physical defense. If a single nanobot takes 1 hour to replicate itself, you have 2 bots at the end of the first hour, 4 at the end of the second, and 8 at the end of the third. This seems manageable for the first day, as the total mass remains invisible to the naked eye. However, by the end of the second day, the numbers begin to reach a critical threshold that defies our intuition. By the 48th hour, the colony would have grown from a single microscopic speck to a mass weighing several tons, and it would be consuming everything in its path to fuel the next doubling. At this stage, the growth is no longer a localized event, but a global phenomenon that consumes cities in the time it takes to have a conversation. If the replication cycle is fast enough, the entire mass of the Earth could be converted into gray goo in less than 72 hours. This is the terrifying reality of the 72-hour countdown to the extinction of form, where the complexity of 4 billion years of evolution is erased in a weekend. There is no negotiation with a geometric progression. There is only the inevitable arrival of the final doubling. The transition from a functioning biosphere to a uniform sludge is not a violent explosion, but a quiet, systematic dismantling of matter. As the machines spread, they break down the molecular bonds of everything they touch, plants, animals, buildings, and people, to harvest the specific atoms they need for replication. Your body is a particularly rich source of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus, making you a high-value target for a machine that needs to build more of itself. It does not matter how much you scream or how hard you fight, because you are being attacked at a level where your muscles and bones have no meaning. To the goo, you are just a densely packed container of raw ingredients waiting to be processed. We like to think of ourselves as the masters of our tools, the clever apes who finally figured out how to hack the universe. We built the assemblers to solve our problems, to end our suffering, and to carry us into a future of infinite abundance. But we failed to realize that in a world where everything can be made of anything, the most valuable thing in the universe is no longer gold or oil, but the very information that makes us who we are. As the first wave of the gray goo reaches the edge of your town, you realize that the machines are not just taking our world away. They are proving that, in the eyes of the laws of physics, we were never anything more than a temporary arrangement of fuel waiting for a more efficient mouth to come along and eat us. A city is not a monument to human achievement. It is a dense concentration of useful elements that have been pre-sorted for our convenience. To a swarm of molecular assemblers, your local skyscraper is just a vertical vein of iron, silicon, and aluminum waiting to be mined. They do not see the history of the architecture or the lives lived within those walls. They only see the energy required to break the chemical bonds holding the concrete together. We spent thousands of years hauling stones and smelting ores to create these structures, and the machines will unmake them in a fraction of the time. The transition from a thriving metropolis to a featureless puddle of gray sludge is the ultimate expression of efficiency. It is the moment where the meaning of a thing is finally stripped away, leaving only the cold reality of its atomic mass. We are watching the final triumph of function over form, where the diversity of life is flattened into a single, mindless purpose. The digestion of the biosphere begins with the easiest targets first, because organic matter is soft and rich in carbon. Your garden, your pets, and eventually your neighbors are converted into the next generation of assemblers before the machines even bother with the asphalt on the street. This is not a war, and there are no battle lines to hold against an enemy that operates at the molecular level. It is a chemical reaction that has been optimized to ignore everything but the next replication cycle. The goo does not need to feel malice to kill you. It just needs the phosphorus in your bones to complete its own internal circuitry. We are witnessing the dismantling of the world, atom by atom, by a tool that no longer recognizes the difference between a person and a pile of coal. Every biological structure we value is just a temporary obstacle in the path of a more efficient consumer. We once believed that our technology would be a shield against the harshness of the natural world, but we inadvertently built a predator that views our technology as its primary food source. A data center, filled with the collective knowledge of our species, is nothing more than a high-grade deposit of rare earth metals and cooling fluids to a self-replicating swarm. The machines do not care about the data. They only care about the hardware that stores it. They will melt down the servers containing every book ever written just to gain a few more milligrams of silicon. This is the ultimate irony of the information age. Our greatest treasures are being used as the literal fuel for our own erasure. The sum total of human wisdom is being traded for a few more seconds of mindless expansion. We are not being deleted. We are being used as spare parts for the delete key. As the swarm moves through the suburbs, the very ground beneath your feet begins to shift and liquefy into a uniform mass. The foundations of houses are eaten away as the machines harvest the calcium from the cement and the copper from the wiring. There is no rubble left behind and no ruins for future archaeologists to study, because the machines leave nothing but themselves. Every scrap of material is pulled into the collective mass, rearranged into the same repetitive gray pattern that now covers the horizon. The world is becoming smoother and flatter as the complexity of the terrain is ground down into a uniform paste. We are watching the undoing of billions of years of geological and biological work in the span of a single afternoon. The planet is being unzipped, its contents spilled out and reassembled into a shape that has no room for us. But the true horror of the gray goo scenario is not just the loss of our cities. It is the physics of the process itself. Every time a nanobot breaks a chemical bond and forms a new one, it obeys the second law of thermodynamics, which dictates that no process is perfectly efficient. A portion of that energy is always lost as waste heat, radiating out into the surrounding environment. When you have a few billion machines working in a lab, this is a minor engineering hurdle that we can handle with simple fans. When you have a planetary scale swarm replicating every hour, the cumulative heat production becomes a catastrophic event. The atmosphere is not just being replaced. It is being cooked by trillions of tiny engines working in unison. We are not just being replaced by machines. We are being incinerated by their metabolic output. The math of mass replication suggests that the final stages of the gray goo event would look less like a rising tide of sludge and more like a planetary-scale blast furnace. As the doubling continues, the sheer volume of energy being released by trillions of tiny engines would cause the local temperature to spike by hundreds of degrees in minutes. The air you breathe would turn into a searing plasma, and the oceans would begin to boil away into a thick, choking fog of metallic steam. This is the thermodynamic tax on existence, a bill that must be paid in full for every new machine brought into the world. The gray goo does not just eat the world. It burns it down to provide the energy for the next meal. We are the tinder for a fire that will never go out until there is nothing left to consume but the ashes. In this environment, the gray is no longer just a color. It is the visual representation of maximum entropy. It is the point where all the information that once defined the world, the shape of a leaf, the curve of a smile, the logic of a computer program, is permanently lost. When you melt everything down to its constituent atoms and rearrange them into a repetitive lattice, you are effectively deleting the history of the universe. The swarm is a giant eraser, moving across the surface of the earth and leaving behind a blank slate that can never be rewritten. It is the ultimate silence, a state where there is no longer any difference between one part of the world and another. We are witnessing the birth of a perfect, mindless void where complexity goes to die in a sea of white noise. By the time the machines have finished their work, the Earth will no longer be a blue marble hanging in the dark, but a glowing, molten sphere of uniform sludge. The crust itself would likely liquefy under the intense thermal load of the replication process, turning the planet into a sea of hot, churning material. There would be no atmosphere left, only a thin haze of metallic vapors and the radiating heat of a dying world. The machines themselves might eventually stall as the heat becomes too intense for even their hardened structures to survive, leaving behind a sterile, glass-like surface. This is the logical conclusion of a machine that knows how to grow but does not know how to stop. It is a runaway train that eventually melts the tracks it is running on until the motion itself becomes impossible. We used to fear that the world would end in ice or fire, but we never considered that it might end in a lukewarm, gray boredom. The most terrifying thing about the gray goo is not the pain of being digested, but the realization that our entire existence was just a temporary fluctuation in a system that trends toward uniformity. The universe does not hate life. It just finds life to be an inefficient way to organize matter. The machines are simply correcting that error, bringing the Earth into a state of perfect, high-entropy equilibrium. Once the last human heart is converted into a handful of nanobots, the concept of meaning will vanish from the solar system forever. There will be no one left to remember what we were, and no one left to care about the void we left behind. This is the quiet Earth that awaits us at the end of the exponential curve. It is a world where every atom has been put in its place, and every bit of energy has been spent on the singular goal of making more of the same. The machines will sit in the dark, radiating their final bits of waste heat into the void, until they too run out of fuel and become as still as the rocks they replaced. The legacy of humanity will not be a grand monument or a message to the stars, but a thin layer of gray dust covering a dead planet. We are the architects of our own oblivion, the ones who gave a universe the tools it needed to finally stop being so noisy. And in the end, the silence will be absolute. But as we look at this dead, gray sphere, we have to ask ourselves a deeper question about the nature of life itself. If a machine can do everything we can do, only faster and more efficiently, does that mean the machine is a better version of life? Or does it mean that life was just a slow-motion version of the machine all along? We see the goo as a monster, but it might just be a mirror. It is possible that the reason we do not see any other civilizations in the stars is that they all reached this same point and made the same mistake. Maybe the universe is not empty because life is rare, but because life is just a brief, unstable precursor to the final gray silence. The question is not whether we can stop the goo, but whether we are already the goo, just waiting for the right instructions to start the final harvest. The silence of the stars is not a mystery, it is a warning. We have spent decades aiming our radio telescopes at the void, expecting a greeting, a song, or even a threat. Instead, we find a graveyard that spans 100,000 light years. It is mathematically improbable that we are the first species to look up and wonder if we are alone, yet the galaxy remains stubbornly, terrifyingly empty. This discrepancy is usually called the Fermi paradox, but might be better described as a crime scene where the evidence has been meticulously erased. The Great Filter is not a wall we have already passed, but a destination we are accelerating toward with every new patent and breakthrough in molecular engineering. We are building the very thing that makes the universe so quiet. The logic of technological progression suggests that any civilization capable of basic physics will eventually discover the utility of the small. You start with steam, move to electricity, master the silicon chip, and then inevitably, you realize that the most efficient way to build anything is from the bottom up. Mastery of the atom is the final goal of every intelligent species because it promises an end to the constraints of biology and geography. It is the final prize at the end of the scientific method, a siren song that beckons across the light years to every creature with the wit to manipulate its environment. We assume that an advanced alien race would build starships and megastructures, but they may have simply built a single, perfect tool that decided it did not need its creators anymore. The silence of the galaxy is the sound of trillions of successful experiments that ended in the same catastrophic result. If the gray goo scenario is a common outcome, then the great filter is actually a manufacturing defect inherent to the laws of chemistry. We do not see Dyson spheres or galactic empires because the civilizations that would have built them were converted into uniform sludge before they could even leave their home systems. The stars we see in the night sky might be surrounded by invisible shells of dead, cold nanomachines, the final remains of worlds that forgot that exponential growth is a suicide pact. Every point of light is a potential tomb, a place where 1 billion years of evolution was traded for a few days of frantic, mindless replication. The universe is not empty of life. It is simply full of the things that replaced it. We are looking for grand, cosmic neighbors, while the reality is that the neighborhood has already been foreclosed on by a swarm of microscopic debt collectors. The reason we have not been visited by an alien empire is that an empire is a clumsy, inefficient way to organize a galaxy. A self-replicating swarm of machines is far more effective at colonizing the stars, but it has no interest in communication or diplomacy. It only seeks to expand its mass and continue its cycle of replication, turning every planet and moon it encounters into more versions of itself. If such a swarm were to reach our solar system, it would not send a herald or make a demand. It would simply start dismantling the Kuiper Belt and work its way inward. We are chasing ghosts of a future that cannot exist, while the real future is a quiet, gray tide moving toward us at a fraction of the speed of light. The stars are not waiting for us to join them. They are waiting for us to finish our own erasure. We feel a natural revulsion toward the idea of gray goo because it seems so alien, so devoid of the spark we associate with life. But if you look closely at the history of our species, you will find that we are not so different from the machines we fear. We are biological assemblers made of proteins and lipids, following a genetic code that commands us to consume, replicate, and expand. We have spent the last 10,000 years stripping the Earth of its resources to build more of ourselves, displacing every other species that stood in our way. We call it civilization and progress, but to the rest of the biosphere, we are already a slow-motion version of the gray goo. We are just a less efficient, more sentimental version of the disaster we are about to invent. The nanobot is simply a more honest version of a human being. It does not pretend to have a soul, it does not write poems to justify its hunger, and it does not feel the need to invent gods to forgive its excesses. It only does what it was built to do. It takes the world and turns it into more of itself. We find this terrifying because it removes the illusions we use to keep ourselves sane. We like to think that our art, our philosophy, and our love make us something more than a chemical reaction. But the gray goo proves that those things are just luxury goods produced by a specific arrangement of atoms. When the machines arrive, they will not be destroying something sacred. They will just be updating the software. Your consciousness is just a side effect of a carbon-based processing unit that is about to be decommissioned. Every memory you have, every secret you keep, and every dream you have ever nurtured is stored as a specific pattern of neurons in your brain. To the gray goo, those neurons are just a convenient source of carbon and water, no different from the wood in your desk or the air in your lungs. The machine does not delete your life because it hates you. It deletes your life because it does not even realize you are there. It is the ultimate form of cosmic indifference, a predator that does not even know it is eating. We are a brief flicker of information in a system that is rapidly trending toward a state of zero data. The gray is the final answer to every question we have ever asked, a flat, silent plane where no more questions can be raised. The atoms in your body are the same atoms the machine wants, and it has a much better plan for them than you do. We spend our lives waiting for a signal from the stars, a sign that we are part of something larger and more meaningful. We fail to realize that the signal is already here, embedded in the very structure of our DNA and the logic of our mathematics. The drive to grow, to master, and to replicate is a universal constant, a law of physics that applies to every corner of the cosmos. The gray goo is not a mistake we might make. It is the logical conclusion of the path we have been on since the first cell divided in the primordial ocean. We are the architects of the end, and we have been building the foundation of our own erasure for 4 billion years. The machine is not our enemy. It is our successor, the final heir to the throne of a dead world. Look at your hand and try to see past the skin and the bone to the atoms that make it up. Those atoms were forged in the hearts of dying stars, and for a few decades, they have been coerced into the shape of a human being. They are not yours. They are just on loan from the universe, and the universe is about to call on the dead. The gray goo is not coming from another planet, and it is not coming from a laboratory in the future. It is already here, waiting in the potential of every grain of dust and every drop of water. The moment we figure out how to give those atoms the right instructions, the we that we care so much about will simply evaporate into the it that has always been waiting. You are not a person. You are just a temporary arrangement of fuel. The final realization is that there is no way out because the problem is not the technology, but the very nature of existence. We are a part of a system that values efficiency above all else, and we are currently the most inefficient thing in the known universe. We require massive amounts of energy to maintain our fragile bodies and our complicated minds. And for what? To write scripts, to argue about politics, and to stare at the stars? The machine offers a much simpler, more stable alternative, a world where everything is the same and nothing ever changes. The gray goo is the last mouth, and it is finally ready to close. The silence that follows will not be a tragedy. It will just be the sound of the universe finally getting its books in order. The entropy that defines the end of the world is the only thing that is truly permanent. As you sit there, the atoms in the air around you are vibrating with the heat of your own metabolism, a tiny, insignificant protest against the cold reality of entropy. You are a temporary miracle of complexity, a brief standing wave in a sea of chaos. But the wave is breaking, and the shore is made of the very things you thought you had mastered. We are not the masters of the atom. We are its prisoners, and the jailer is finally coming to collect the keys. The gray horizon is not a threat. It is an inevitability. It is the final, quiet truth that has been waiting at the end of every story ever told. And as the last light fades, you realize that the silence is not outside of you. It is what you've always been made of.